There are seasons when God does his deepest work where nobody can see it. No applause, no confirmation, no likes, no evidence that anything is changing on the outside. And you start wondering if you're wasting your time praying, believing, holding on. But what if the silence is not abandonment? What if the quiet is construction? What if God is rebuilding you in secret because what he's preparing you for can't be sustained by the old version of you? We celebrate elevation, but we resist excavation. We want God to add, but he insists on subtracting, because destiny doesn't begin with what you gain. It begins with what you're willing to let die. Some things don't need to be fixed. They need to be buried. Some habits don't need management. They need a funeral. Some mindsets don't need motivation. They need resurrection power after they've been laid in the ground. You keep asking God to change your situation, but God is focused on transforming your foundation. Because if he brings you into the future you're praying for with the identity you've been surviving with, the blessing would crush you. So he hides you. He reduces the noise. He limits the audience, not because you're insignificant, but because what he's shaping is sacred. Seeds don't grow on stages. They grow underground, in darkness, under pressure, surrounded by dirt. And nobody applauds a seed for being buried, but burial is not the end. It's the beginning of multiplication. The old you had to learn how to survive. The new you has to learn how to surrender. Survival teaches you control. Destiny demands trust. Survival says, I'll protect myself. Destiny says, I'll lose my life to find it. And that's why this feels uncomfortable. You're not backsliding, you're shedding. You're not losing momentum. You're losing weight you can't carry into where God is taking you. There are versions of you that worked in previous seasons, but will sabotage the next one. The coping mechanisms that kept you alive when you were wounded will keep you stuck when you're healed. God is not punishing you by removing what's familiar. He's preparing you by dismantling what's limiting. You think he's taking things away, but he's actually making room. Room for clarity, room for courage, room for calling. The hardest part of transformation is that it feels like loss before it feels like purpose. You grieve who you were while God is celebrating who you're becoming. You miss the old rhythm, the old relationships, the old sense of control. But God knows that if he doesn't interrupt what's comfortable, you'll never step into what's meaningful. So he allows the pruning. He allows the breaking. He allows the unanswered questions, not to destroy you, but to develop you. You're being rebuilt in ways you didn't ask for because you prayed for a life you couldn't yet sustain. Strength is being formed in silence. Discernment is being sharpened in disappointment. Humility is being planted in hiddenness. And patience is being forged in the waiting. You don't see progress because progress doesn't always look like addition. Sometimes progress looks like subtraction. Sometimes growth looks like emptiness. Sometimes faith looks like obedience without evidence. Let the old you die. Let the version that needed approval die. Let the version that thrived on chaos die. Let the version that confused busyness with purpose die. Let the version that kept God at arm's length while asking him for blessings die. Because the old you cannot inherit the new assignment. You can't carry new wine in old skins without losing both. God loves you too much to pour his future into a container that would rupture under the weight of it. And here's the tension. God doesn't rush this process. We rush healing. We rush clarity. We rush calling. But God builds with eternity in mind. He would rather take longer and make you solid than move faster and leave you hollow. So if you feel delayed, you might actually be being detailed. If you feel overlooked, you might be being overhauled. If you feel forgotten, you might be being fortified. You're not behind. You're in between. Between who you were and who you're becoming. Between promise and manifestation. Between burial and breakthrough. And the in-between is where faith is proven. Because it's easy to trust God when the results are visible. It's harder when the only evidence is his word and your obedience. Stop trying to resurrect what God already buried. Stop revisiting relationships he closed. Stop romanticizing seasons He outgrew you out of. The pain you're trying to avoid might be the very pressure producing the capacity you've been praying for. God is not asking you to understand everything. He's asking you to trust Him with everything. You are not being rebuilt to look impressive. You're being rebuilt to be effective. You're being rebuilt to stand when storms come. You're being rebuilt to carry influence without losing integrity. You're being rebuilt to love deeply without losing yourself. You're being rebuilt to walk in authority without pride, to serve without resentment, to lead without fear. And one day, people will see the fruit and think it happened overnight. They won't know about the nights you cried in silence, the prayers you whispered when hope felt thin, the decisions you made to obey when nobody was watching. They won't see the hidden years, the quiet surrender, the internal warfare. But God saw it all, and He counts what was done in secret. So don't despise this season. Don't rush this process. Don't cling to what God is asking you to release. The old you had its time. It served its purpose. But destiny requires a different architecture, a stronger frame, a deeper root system. And what God is doing now is preparing you for a weight you've never carried, a calling you've never walked in, a life that will require more faith than comfort, more surrender than control, more dependence than independence. And what feels like an ending is really the moment where God leans in and continues to shape, refine, dismantle, and rebuild you in secret, piece by piece, layer by layer, until what rises is no longer driven by fear, no longer anchored in the past, no longer defined by survival, but fully alive, fully surrendered, fully aligned with what He spoke before you ever knew how it would happen. There are moments when life goes quiet in ways that feel unsettling, almost suspicious. The noise fades, the affirmation slows down. The doors that once seemed open are suddenly closed, and you're left with long stretches of waiting where nothing appears to be happening. But this silence is not evidence that God has stepped away. It is often proof that He has stepped in closer. When God begins His deepest work, He usually does it away from the crowd, away from visibility, away from anything that could distract you from what He is forming within you. Hidden seasons are uncomfortable because we are wired to measure progress by what we can see. We look for movement, recognition, results. When those markers disappear, we assume stagnation. But transformation does not require an audience. Construction is loud only at the surface. The most critical work happens below ground, where foundations are poured and reinforced out of sight. God knows that if He allows you to remain too visible while He is reshaping you, you might start performing instead of becoming. In these quiet stretches, God is removing your dependence on external validation and teaching you how to stand on internal conviction. When applause is absent, motives are revealed. When affirmation is scarce, faith becomes honest. You begin to discover whether you were pursuing purpose or chasing approval, whether your obedience was rooted in calling or fueled by attention. This refining cannot happen on a stage. It happens in rooms where only God sees your decisions, your discipline, and your devotion. Silence also exposes what has been holding you up instead of God. When relationships shift, opportunities pause, and familiar routines are disrupted, you are forced to confront what you were leaning on for security. God allows this not to destabilize you, but to recenter you. He is stripping away crutches so that when you walk into what He has prepared, you walk with strength rather than dependence, with confidence rather than neediness. The hidden season retrains your spiritual senses. You learn to recognize God's voice without constant confirmation. You learn to obey without immediate reward. You learn to trust without visible proof. These lessons build endurance that public success could never teach. Anyone can praise God when the outcome is clear, but faith matures when obedience continues in uncertainty. What feels like stillness is actually alignment. God is adjusting your priorities, recalibrating your desires, and refining your character so that when movement resumes, it flows in the right direction. He slows you down to speed you up later. He conceals you so that when you are revealed, you are ready, not fragile. Hidden seasons are not wasted years, they are protected years. They shield you from exposure before you have the capacity to carry it. They protect you from influence before you have integrity to manage it. They guard you from promotion before your foundation can withstand its weight. What appears to be delay is actually divine restraint, ensuring that when the door opens, it does not crush you but confirms what was built in the quiet. If nothing seems to be happening around you, look within you. Strength is being formed. Roots are growing deeper. Convictions are becoming unshakable. God is doing work that cannot be rushed, work that cannot be microwaved, work that must be developed slowly, carefully, intentionally, because what He is preparing will require depth, stability, and endurance that only hidden seasons can produce. There comes a point in every transformative journey where improvement is no longer enough. Repair won't carry you forward, and adjustment won't sustain what is coming. This is the moment where God calls for surrender rather than refinement, because destiny does not coexist with certain versions of you. The old self may have been functional, even necessary, but what once preserved you can now prevent you. Growth at this level demands not polishing what already exists, but releasing it entirely. The old version of you learned how to survive. It adapted to pain, learned defense, developed strategies to cope, control, and protect. Those patterns were not born out of rebellion, they were born out of necessity. But survival is not the same as fulfillment. What kept you alive in a broken season will keep you limited in a healed one. God's intention is not to keep you managing wounds, but to lead you into wholeness. And wholeness requires the death of identities built around fear, scarcity, and self-preservation. Letting the old self die feels like loss because it involves familiarity. You know how that version thinks, reacts, and responds. You know its limits and its strengths. Releasing it creates vulnerability because you are stepping into a version of yourself you have not yet learned to trust. That is why this process is so deeply uncomfortable. You are being asked to surrender control before you see the outcome, to release certainty before clarity arrives. This death is not dramatic, it is daily. It happens in small, obedient choices that contradict old instincts. The moment you choose peace instead of retaliation, the moment you choose faith instead of anxiety, the moment you stop seeking validation where God has withdrawn His grace. Each decision weakens the old identity and strengthens the new one. Transformation is not a single breakthrough, it is a series of quiet funerals. God insists on this process because destiny carries weight. Calling demands capacity. Influence requires integrity. The future you are praying for would expose the weaknesses of the old you. If God were to elevate you without eliminating certain mindsets, habits, and motivations, the pressure of purpose would magnify what was never healed. So God deals with the root before releasing the fruit. This is why some doors only close when you are ready to walk through bigger ones. Some relationships only end when their role in shaping the old you is complete. Some opportunities disappear because they belong to a version of you that cannot go forward. God is not being cruel, He is being precise. He removes what no longer aligns so that what is coming will not be compromised. The death of the old self creates space for trust. You stop relying on your own strength and start depending on God's guidance. You stop striving to prove yourself and start resting in obedience. You stop defining yourself by what you've survived and begin discovering who you are becoming. This is not erasure, it is evolution. Nothing is wasted. Every season, every lesson, every wound contributes to the new life being formed, but none of them get to remain in control. What feels like losing yourself is actually the beginning of finding your true self. The old identity steps aside so that destiny can breathe, grow, and take shape. And as uncomfortable as this death feels, it is the most merciful act God can perform because it ensures that when the new life emerges, it is not driven by fear or limitation, but by freedom, faith, and alignment with what God intended from the beginning. There is a painful misunderstanding that often accompanies seasons of loss, as though subtraction automatically means rejection. When things begin to fall away, relationships, opportunities, momentum, it is easy to assume something has gone wrong or that God is displeased. But pruning is not punishment. It is precision. It is the careful, intentional removal of what is no longer producing life so that what remains can grow stronger and healthier. God does not cut randomly. He cuts strategically. Loss feels harsh because we tend to measure blessing by accumulation, more options, more access, more affirmation. Yet growth in God's economy often comes through reduction. He removes distractions that drain focus, dependencies that weaken faith, and attachments that compete with purpose. What feels like God taking something from you is often God saving you from something that would limit you later. Pruning hurts because it involves separation, but separation is sometimes the only way to protect what truly matters. Delay carries the same tension. Waiting can feel like denial when expectations are high and prayers have been sincere. But delay is not inactivity. While you are waiting, God is working beneath the surface, strengthening character, correcting perspective, and building patience. Immediate answers might satisfy desire, but delayed fulfillment builds endurance. God understands that receiving too early can be just as damaging as never receiving at all. Timing is part of the blessing, not an obstacle to it. Discomfort also plays a critical role in preparation. God often allows pressure not to break you, but to reveal what is within you. Comfort keeps weaknesses hidden. Pressure exposes them. Through challenge, you discover where trust is shallow, where faith wavers, where pride still exists. This exposure is not meant to shame you, but to heal you. God brings to the surface what He intends to transform. Subtraction makes room. When certain things are removed, space is created for new strength, new vision, and new discipline. Without loss, there would be no capacity for replacement. Without emptiness, there would be no hunger. God clears out what is familiar so that you are open to what is necessary. You may mourn what was taken, but you will eventually recognize that it could not coexist with what was coming. This process often feels unfair because it disrupts stability. You question why things that seemed good had to end, why progress had to slow, why certainty had to disappear. But God is not committed to your comfort as much as He is committed to your calling. Stability without growth becomes stagnation. God loves you enough to disturb what is settled if it prevents what is significant. Pruning also sharpens discernment. When options are limited, clarity increases. When distractions are reduced, purpose becomes clearer. God narrows your focus so that your energy is not scattered across too many directions. What remains after pruning is what truly matters. What survives delay is what is resilient. What endures discomfort is what is rooted. Preparation rarely feels kind in the moment. It feels restrictive, confusing, even painful. But looking back, you begin to see the wisdom in what was removed, the mercy in what was delayed, and the grace in what was denied. Each loss was shaping endurance. Each delay was strengthening trust. Each uncomfortable moment was expanding capacity. What once felt like God holding you back was actually God positioning you forward. What God builds in secret is designed to last in public. Hidden processes are not shortcuts, they are reinforcements. While outward change may seem minimal, inward strength is being layered, reinforced, and tested so that when exposure comes, collapse does not follow. God is less concerned with how quickly something appears and far more invested in how long it can stand. Longevity requires depth, and depth is formed where no one is watching. In unseen seasons, character becomes the priority. Skills can attract attention, but character sustains influence. God uses obscurity to refine motives, align intentions, and develop integrity that does not depend on recognition. When no one is applauding, obedience becomes pure. When no one is affirming, faith becomes personal. These moments shape a foundation that success cannot shake and failure cannot destroy. Alignment is also formed in the hidden. Without constant external noise, you begin to recognize what truly matters. Desires become clearer. Convictions grow stronger. You stop chasing what looks impressive and start pursuing what is meaningful. God uses stillness to recalibrate direction, ensuring that when movement resumes, it flows in harmony with His purpose rather than personal ambition. Endurance is another product of secrecy. Public victories are celebrated, but private perseverance is what carries you through. Sustained pressure. In the quiet, you learn how to remain faithful without immediate results. You learn how to keep showing up without guarantees. This kind of endurance cannot be taught through success alone. It is forged through consistency in unseen places. God also strengthens your internal life so that external challenges do not define you. When your identity is rooted in calling rather than outcome, circumstances lose their power to destabilize you. Hidden seasons teach you how to remain anchored regardless of conditions. Approval no longer controls you. Rejection no longer derails you. Stability becomes internal rather than circumstantial. The strength developed in secret allows you to carry responsibility without resentment. When preparation is thorough, pressure does not feel personal, it feels purposeful. You stop interpreting challenges as attacks and start recognizing them as assignments. This shift in perspective is essential for leadership, influence, and service because it keeps you grounded when demands increase. Hidden processes also protect humility. When you know how much work happened beneath the surface, you are less likely to boast about what emerges above it. Gratitude replaces entitlement. Stewardship replaces arrogance. You understand that what you carry was entrusted, not earned. This humility becomes a safeguard, ensuring that growth does not lead to pride and influence does not lead to isolation. God's intention in rebuilding you privately is not to keep you hidden forever, but to ensure that when you are revealed, you are ready to stand firm, ready to serve well, ready to remain faithful when visibility increases, ready to withstand pressure without losing peace, ready to walk in purpose without compromising identity. What emerges from the hidden season is not just a stronger version of you, but a more aligned one. Strength is balanced with surrender. Confidence is anchored in trust. Vision is matched with discipline. This alignment allows you to move forward with clarity rather than confusion, with authority rather than insecurity, with consistency rather than burnout. The work done in secret is what makes public fruit sustainable. It ensures that when doors open, you do not lose yourself inside them. When responsibility increases, your foundation holds. When influence expands, your integrity remains intact. What God builds quietly carries a strength that does not need to announce itself because its stability speaks louder than any introduction. All of this comes together in one truth. Nothing God has allowed in your life has been wasted. The hidden seasons, the loss, the pruning, the slow rebuilding, the uncomfortable surrender, all of it has been intentional. You were never falling apart. You were being formed. What felt like silence was actually strategy. What felt like delay was divine alignment. What felt like death was the doorway to life. God was not trying to preserve the old version of you. He was preparing the true one. He was teaching you how to live without leaning on applause, how to walk without needing certainty, how to trust without demanding timelines. He was strengthening your roots so that when the winds of purpose blow, you don't topple. He was expanding your capacity so the blessing wouldn't become a burden. He was shaping your character so your calling wouldn't outrun your integrity. The season you question the most is the season that qualified you. The moments you thought disqualified, you were actually developing discernment, humility, and endurance. What you released made room. What you lost created capacity. What you endured built authority, and what you allowed to die ensured that what is coming can live fully, freely, and firmly. You are not emerging empty-handed. You are emerging anchored. You are emerging aligned. You are emerging with clarity instead of confusion, faith instead of fear, strength instead of striving. The version of you that comes out of this season will not need to prove anything, rush anything, or force anything, because you will know who you are, whose you are, and why you're here. What God is revealing next will make sense of what he concealed before. And when destiny begins to speak loudly, you'll realize the quiet work was worth it, the surrender was necessary, the pruning was merciful, and the rebuilding was sacred, because the old you had to die so the life God promised could finally live.